Okay, so now we're live. I mean, we're recording.
Okay, so let me just cover some of the basics. Stop me if I'm jumping too far ahead, right?
Okay, okay.
First thing is there's a project called Loopback Angular Admin. It's
Yeah.
on GitHub, so that's what I'll be working with, simply because it's a good reference project to build on and learn from. The other thing is, well, where is it? And give me a second. Where is it exactly on GitHub? So let's just bring that in here. Here, so the Loopback Angular admin, that's the project.
Uh-huh.
Don't go by the path you see here on WebStorm, my IDE. That's just my local path. That doesn't mean it's the GitHub path. So that's number one.
Yeah.
The second thing I'd just like to point out is when learning about users, there's another really good tutorial which is from StrongLoop itself. They have a blog on it, but the blog pretty much is the README for this. So StrongLoop has a access control example.
Okay.
And there's some very small questions that get left unanswered once you follow things like this. And we'll try to go over them now. I think you have some of those questions, so if you just bring them up, we'll be able to tackle them. So back to Bman's project. Some basics. There's a client folder which usually houses your app, which can be an Angular app. There's a common folder which houses your models, both some any methods or functions or remote calls you can add to those. Any hooks go in the JavaScripts for a model, and anything that's data ship relationship that can be defined as a JSON goes in the JSON for that model. And just jumping to server, that hosts the server side. That's like the server side logic for your entire script, and it has a space to put your boot scripts where you can do things like load. Maybe settings is a model object. You can load your settings. You can load your users. You can load some content. Um, you know, the other files are usually provided as a template. When you bootstrap a template project for Loopback, they're provided. But something like this numbered is usually added in by a user for their own purposes. So far, so good?
Yeah, yeah. It's for now. It's quite well.
All right. Lastly, this is Bman's project. He likes to work just in database memory. You can enable Mongo, which is fine. But for my learning, I found it easier that while working with the memory connector, I just turn on a file, database.json. I feel like that's the easiest way for me to see what's going on, what Loopback is doing behind the scenes, because it's one big JSON file. So that's what I find easiest to learn about things.
Cool. That's very cool.
Okay.
So go back to that. How did you set up that file? Just.
So under server, you
Uh-huh.
always have a data sources.json file. Usually it just has these 3 lines.
Okay.
Just
Okay, so you just point the JSON to a file and you put it where?
Yeah, it'll create it and reuse it.
Okay, so yeah, okay.
And it goes in your root directory. So these are just some of the basic helpful things. The second helpful thing is often people will create, like myself, I made this mistake a lot. I would go to common and I would add a model in there, right? And then I would be like, it's not exposed. Why not? You have to go to model config and you have to list it. Not only do you have to list it, then you have to expose it by saying it's public. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I make that mistake a lot. I forget to list it, and then I'm wondering why it's not there, or I forget to say public true. Now the other thing, and this is kind of the fun stuff, is you should understand a little bit about strong loop. So let's go into the node modules, right? I'm going to collapse all this. So let's just look at it from a node modules perspective. Obviously, you're going to have some loopback modules in there, right?
Yeah.
The most interesting one, I think, while reading the documentation worth keeping up with, is the one that has the built-in models. So let's go find that. Find it more easily. So this always gets. Oh, there you go. I got lucky. Okay, so in Loopback, under node modules, the basic Loopback node module, common models. So these are your built-in models, right? So this is this is something you can always learn a lot from because there's a lot of code in there that translates directly to what probably you're trying to do. Sorry, let me jump back. So here, let me keep this loopback common models, right? So let's, for example, look at user.js and collapse it, right? So you can see that it has a lot of methods like create access token, credentials, login, logout, password, verify, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to memorize them, but it helps to know if you need to go looking that they're there for you to read. The other thing that's kind of useful is user.json, because if it's a built-in model, you can go look at the documentation, but it's always helpful to just come in here and see what the properties and the access control list, how it all works. So far, so good?
Yeah, it's just like a normal loopback app, but in an extension. Basically your app is an extension for this node module.
Right. So now what I personally don't like is I don't like using the same model name called user. I think let's go look at bman. So let's look at how bman extended a user model, right? So by default has properties like username, password, etc. So he needed to do more. Let's go look at his common user.js. Doesn't have anything big. Before create, he does some magic. You can ignore it for now. User.json is more relevant. So he didn't want to add any properties. So it seems like whatever the default properties were, he deemed them good enough for his project. And he did want some more relations, which I think are pretty clever. For example, this role relationship is good because usually what you want is on your client side, you want to be able to say, hey, I have a UI. The UI is client side. So I need to know, I can only control the navigation of my UI. So given that the user that just logged in, I'm going to arrange my navigation differently. Maybe they see some pages, maybe they don't see some pages. So I need to find out which roles these users have. And by default, I really don't feel like Loopback is set up. The default user model for Loopback, I don't feel is set up to let you get at roles or what roles a person has. That's not how that ACL is set up. So I think this extra relationship that we added or built makes a lot of sense, where you can just say, okay, for this user, what are their roles?
Yeah.
So you asked about user management and how smoothly it flows. So if the built-in model doesn't have it, this seems like a standard patch we could all benefit from by adding this to our relations. Make sense?
Cool. Yeah, it does.
Because I was looking for this myself just today and yesterday. And just want to show people how to explore this on their own so that we're not always, our hands aren't tied behind our backs. So this is a little bit of GitHub magic that people may or may not know about. When you're looking, for example, when you find a great reference project and you want to learn from it as much as possible, it's kind of obvious, but let's just say it for the sake of saying it. You can do things like, okay, this guy wrote this admin project, he probably had roles in it, right? So you're searching that repository. And I mean, if another thing might be useful, might not, is you can say, well, give me anything that bman has done, not just this project, right? So you can say anything by bman. We'll leave that out. We'll stay local because it's his project. So we'll just search this repository, which is already marked. Okay, so I came here and I was looking for roles, and luckily there weren't more than 8 hits in code. A couple were views, couple were load users. So I was like, okay, it's gonna load users and roles, fine, etc., etc. One thing I quickly learned was how does he utilize in his UI? So I found this little bit of Angular code right now. So he has a users controller, which makes sense. You would need that on client side. And basically he does a filter which says include, right? So if it's a relationship, let's see, where did it go? Right, so if he's added it as a relationship, it won't just come back as default data, you have to do include. Now you may have read the Loopback documentation and you may know this, or you can just benefit from kind of learning as you go along from the code that this is how you pull nested relationships. So, easy. Another thing I kind of benefited by searching this way was, I think this is how I found his, user.json, right? This is when I didn't know about it, this is how I found his user.json, and I realized he'd added this, which is what I just showed you guys. That, this is just on GitHub, what you see locally on mine. Anyway, so, what I really liked was this blame feature, and sometimes people forget about it. Who wrote it? Maybe somebody contributed it. And the history feature. So with the history, I'm like, okay, so he had one whole commit around creating relationship between users and roles. And before this, maybe he didn't have this feature. So I just went into the commit and I'm like, what else is involved? And there you go, having a controller on the client side is involved and having something on the server side is involved. Problem solved. So if the other person is really good at bite-sized commits, we can all really learn something from them when working with Loopback. Anyway, that pretty much sums up all I know about these things. Oh, one more thing. I don't like naming this user.json because I'm sure the code is good at identifying, one user.json from another user.json and naming it, and there's an Angular model that's built. It does things like, okay, it builds loopback services. So basically it takes all this data and it says, I'm going to generate a file for you. Let's go look at client. Most people may not know about this, so that was good. So it generates a file for you called loopback services. I'm going to make it so you can read it. So it puts access token, anything that was public, it puts it in here and makes it easy for you to access in an Angular fashion. I'm not a big fan because I'm like, well, which user am I accessing? Obviously, the code doesn't get confused, but so what I do is I just name it to something called user model. So I'm just a bit more explicit. So let me just share a bit of that code with you guys. So I'm going to go to GitHub. Say I really like using user model, and this is my user company name, so whatever. So I'm going to search for that code and blah blah blah. There you go, user model. So that's JS. Let's go to the JSON. There you go. So here's an example public where I also kept my base as the built-in user model, just like, let me put them side by side, just like Beeman did over here, right? But the fine difference is, the casing, uppercase user model, the way I used it, and nobody has to follow this. But if it annoys you to keep using the same name again and you worry, then you don't have to use the same name. You can be more explicit. It's a thing of preference. I think where it really made a difference was on Angular side, it was doing weird things like the file it generated. I think they may have fixed it. I think the user used to be lowercase or something about using this on Angular side, doing user.this or user.that with a lowercase u or uppercase u. I don't know what was going on. Made it feel very, very weird to write the code, which is why maybe I insisted on having user model. So my loopback code looked cleaner. So that may have been hit. That may have been the thing, but I don't remember. All right, now you know everything I know. Why don't you ask some questions? If I can answer them, I'll let you know.
Okay, first of all, when you start a new project, fresh new project, you have this users from the built-in model, from the node modules. You have the users module that it's exposed through the API for everyone to see. You have the URL users. You don't have the model because the model is a built-in. And if you want to name it something else like user model, well, you should probably just not make that public or accessible. How can you do that? How can you?
Okay, so understood. You're extending user. So now you want to lock down the built-in model. You don't want the built-in model exposed over the REST API. You want only your own extension model exposed. That makes sense. So that takes us back. Let me simplify. My junk here. Maybe I can just expand my. Okay, all in one line. So remember, the first thing we started with was data sources and model config. So they're both under server. They're child of that folder, children of that folder. And so he has, for example, exposed user as true. And this is one more thing that I feel like is kind of odd because there are two things called user. So which one am I? So you can see this here. He has a capital user, which is public false. That means the built-in model is false, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't want a name conflict. So he was forced to use a lowercase u here for his own, right? That's what I dislike. I think that because there would be naming conflict, he has to use lowercase user and go with it. That's why I use uppercase user model, and I'm way more explicit about that. So you can see he made this public true, and he made the built-in public false. If you want, you can do something like what I'm about to do. You can put them together, so that it's obvious that. And by the way, what the change I'm making, if you make a change like this, you can't just arbitrarily change that. Then you have to go change the name of this file also. Not the native file, but yeah. You have to go change the name of your own extended model to be user-model.json. You can't just be arbitrary like that. So now, if I really want to stick with user model here, then I have to change the name of my file to user-model.json. I have to change the name here to be uppercase user, uppercase model, etc., etc. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
I'm back out of this because I don't want to ruin the project I clone.
Yeah, don't worry. Another question that it really bugs me out when I have to boot my server for the first time. I really need a first user. So I really learned it a couple of days ago, but just for the sake, so just people can see it. How can you boot and you can install your first user from there?
That's fair. Same, it's this same problem I solved in my first week using Loopback, and which is why I like the Bman project. It's been solved, so we can refer to it. By the way, one thing I like to point out: this is like your database.json. You see how this user is empty, but then this user has the users that he created because it's his extended model, right? So again, just letting people know. They may get confused. They may come here and they expect to see their data here. It's not here, but it's working. Why is it working? Well, this is the built-in model, and you might be using your extended model. So the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I'll move on to what you asked, which was bootstrapping. Okay, bootstrapping data into your server basically goes in the server boot script, right? And why is the numbering there? They're trying to solve some kind of a challenge. Maybe they solved it already. For the last 6 months, I don't know if they have solved it or they're still working on it. They're trying to solve a challenge where you can specify the order, like have some kind of a JSON file that says which order to load these scripts in, so you don't have to hack the alphanumeric, because you get back something from the file system in the order that it is. So this is a hack. I'm not using some kind of a clever JSON file. I don't even know if they have that yet. So 010203, just make sure they load in the right order. That's all it does. So load users. This seems like what you're asking for. So let's close everything else. Let's focus on this. Basically, this is just something. It's logging. What it does is it prints pretty things that are actually quite helpful towards. Let me bring over one of my windows. So I'll just bring this over for a second. So for example, Bman's done this thing where you can launch the server and client separately. Basically, when you launch the client, you're kind of listening for those files to change. That's why usually the client, doesn't sit in a wait loop. It's because of the watch task that the client is sitting in a wait loop from terminal. And server, of course, is the server. So if I do something like npm start, you don't see any logs. And that's kind of useless, right? And now this gets into a little bit of using Loopback cleverly, or at least the way they use it so you don't go too far from how they're used to doing it. If you want to turn on these logs, you can just do something like debug boot star environment variable. So npm start, for example, is a command that was recommended by Bman. He's fix everything. By the way, that's his handle. That's not his real name. So I'm going to set an environment variable just before I start this. Hopefully you can read it. I know it's kind of small. I'm going to hit enter, right? Look at the difference in the logs, right? This coloring is way more useful. And you also know that instead of creating a user, I just found existing roles. So I just went with that, right? And it's up to you whether you want to create something multiple times or just once. I'm thinking most people want to seed their database once, but then they don't want to go in and start deleting those scripts, right? So instead of the create method in Loopback, most people might appreciate the find or create method, right? So if you can find it, leave it alone. If you don't find it, then go ahead and create it. So having said that, you can read about the debug module a little. I'm just giving it the logs a pretty name, and that's the pretty name that shows up here. That's all that's about.
Yeah.
Having said that,
One other question before that, is the debug module included in a clean loopback app, or you just have to install it from npm?
it, I don't remember, honestly. I do know they use it, but you can install it.
Okay,
I don't remember
okay.
the answer to that question. I'm sorry.
Okay, don't worry. Everybody check out if it's included or not.
Yeah, just something like this will put it quickly on your npm install save debug will quickly put it in your package.json file, so that'll get you there.
Perfect.
But I don't remember, because I don't remember if they're offering a sample file or not, right? Thing is, it wasn't included in Deepman's project, for example. So let's say that this guy started with with a template that he generated from Loopback. Then the answer is no, it's not there by default. So that's mostly because maybe they're not sample boot scripts there by default. There's nothing like 00 sample.js, sample boot.js. Like if there was a 00 sample boot.js in the template, then that file may have a sample log and then it would be included. But there's no such thing.
Okay.
I learned about this simply because I was looking at Loopback's own projects, like access control. When I set up access control, if you go to Loopback forums on Google Groups, they'll advise you to start turning on these things, right? They'll tell you to do things like this. They have extensive logging, so let me do something for example here, right? Let's turn off, instead of Loopback boot star, let's turn on Loopback star. I'm just saying that it might exist. So you see how many more logs you see all of a sudden?
Yeah.
There's a Loopback Explorer route helper log. There's a Loopback boot executor log. What else is there? These are namespaces, really. Let me just show this for the sake of everybody else. What else? Crazy things. There's a Loopback boot compiler log, right? So they're trying to segment their logs the best they can. And I kind of just stuck with that. I was like, if that's what you guys are using and they say it's really small library, then I'll just stick to it for now. Okay. Actually, let me show you one cool thing. So let's say you don't want to see all this crazy stuff. You only care about the data source, right? So you can turn on this loopback :data source. And this is most of this stuff isn't really anything but syntax and has nothing to do with Angular loopback. But for the sake of people, why not show it, right? Yeah. And so now I'm going to show two types of files. I'm going to put a comma. I'm going to show all my boot scripts, but from the loopback, I only want the data source name scope, right? No spaces, then a space and the command I was going to run anyway, npm start, right? Now what you see is, you see my load scripts, but you also see this thing, right? That it sets up a memory file in this one. So,
okay, that's cool. That's very cool and very interesting.
The most use I had for something like this from the loopback side is they print the access control lists. Let me see if I can get that for you for a second, because it might be worth it. So let's just go there. Debug. Okay, I think that is a question. Okay. Debug logs ACL. These are the forums on Google Groups for Loopback. ACL. It's really not funny. Okay, I'm gonna give up on this for a second. I was hoping I could show everybody something useful. I don't remember off the top of my head what the namespace for access control log was, but it's worth looking at because you will get confused and your rules will go the wrong way when you just start. So it's helpful looking at seeing what it's doing and what it thinks is true and false, and then trying to fix your rules, for example, in your model file. So if you have, for example, you have these ACLs, access control, right? And for some reason, by mistake, you wrote admin deny everything to admin, right? You think you've done it right, and you're scratching your head thinking, what's wrong? And the log say, no, you're denying everything to admin. Then you may go here and fix this, right? So that's when that's useful.
Okay, cool.
Okay, sorry about that. Really, coming back to what you're asking. Load users, right? Here it is. This person is doing, he has done, basically, if you're not using a memory connector, he just turns out because he doesn't want to see it if you're using a memory connector, or explicitly insisting to do this. You can rip out all this stuff, really the need isn't here, right? He basically asks, when you write a boot script, the most important thing is you pass in, the framework passes you in the app object. That's probably the most important part of the contract. What can you do with that app object? You can ask for models from that app object. So you basically ask for 3 models, actually 4, the fourth one you see in a bit. So that's your user mapping. This is just his own data, like your own data. It may be a JSON file. You might do a require on a JSON file and dynamically load your roles, dynamically load your wishes data, whatever it is. The logic kind of starts there. You're saying for each row, find or create that row, right? Simple enough.
Yeah, okay.
Whether you hard coded it or you came from a file who cares. Then you say that's successful. Then for each, now this thing is just your JSON. Zoom in, your user can nest it inside a role in your JSON file, right? It's not something that has to do with Loopback. It's just very right to see how he's written his JSON such that there's a role and there are users inside that role. That's just data structure. This one says this has nothing to do with Loopback. Anyway, so you go to your users and you say, okay, for each user that under that role, admin, or under that role, customer, go ahead, find or create that user. Same. So that may exist or may not exist. And you see it's a callback thing. Because when you did the find or create for this, you were in the function, it came back, you printed out whether it was found or created. That information is given by the third argument. So let's look at this contract. When you do find or create, the first argument is what you want to find. The second argument is if you fail to find the object you want to create. And the third argument is basically a callback. And the callback has 3 arguments. Error, or the actual object that was created, or found. And then a flag that tells you, hey, was this found, or was it created and then handed back? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm sorry, the audio is not very great. I don't know what's happening.
If I collapse it, does it help? Does this help?
Yeah, it's better. So, the third argument you said, it's a function that gets the error, and which are the second and the third argument, and line 47.
Sure.
Okay, and the callback?
It's a callback, meaning it's called by the framework. So when the role is done finding or creating, it will call this anonymous function, and basically this is your hook back to getting control back and continuing.
Okay, in the callback function, what's the second and third argument from the callback?
Okay. This is basically whatever was created or whatever was found. It's the actual object, model object.
Okay.
And this is letting you know, did I create it or did I find it? Because it's one of the two. It's either or.
Okay.
If you take a look at this log statement, and hopefully it clears it up for you.
Yeah. Okay.
So find or create on the roles. Once that's done, then you find or create on the users, right? Same thing. Take a look.
Yeah, the same thing.
Then principles is the last thing, and I mean, I'm not going to say I understand what principles are about, but it's some kind of a table that sits in the middle of roles, role mappings, and users. It's a relationship thing. It's a schema relationship. SQL, whatever thing. Yes, my data structure knowledge sucks. Whatever it is, you need to create a principal. So that's what you do. You type an ID. I think what it's about is like admin is a principal.
Uh-huh.
The role admin itself is a principal. The role users itself is a principal. So you have to create that mapping, and that's what this is doing. And the thing is, if you're this far along, I imagine we could put a find or create on this as well. But I think this is unique. So if you're in here, you probably need to create this. Okay, honestly, I don't know if I should wrap this in a find or create, but it just seems to work, so I'm leaving it alone.
Okay.
So anybody could rip off this 02 load users, and all they'll have to do is just change this part and point it to a JSON file of their own, and they'll be able to bootstrap users and both. And if they have the time, they can read through it and kind of get a sense for things.
Okay. It's kind of like Laravel, but
Are you used to callback methods?
I mean, Laravel doesn't use callbacks, but I think I was just starting to look at it, but it did make the seed script. I mean, it could put in the database if it not found. So yeah, it's kind of the same thing. For those users who are really familiar to Laravel, it's kind of the same thing. So yeah.
Well, it's also bootstrapping code. So once you have it, it's good to understand it, etc., etc. But honestly, once you have it, you might as well just use it and turn off your brain.
Yeah.
I'm sure plenty of people who watch this video are going to go, "Oh no, what did he say?" But yeah, so just add your data and be done with it. You got bigger fish to fry. What else can I answer for you?
Just one more thing. Whenever the login is done, just go to the Explorer, make yourself a login. How do you get the access tokens? How do you get to see the other users? I mean,
so that is, I understand, a little tricky. In the sense, you just have to read it a bit. It's not. Let me see if I can get you to the dots.
I mean, not from Angular, but I don't know, from the Explorer. I mean, because in the Explorer you get this resource where you can see the users, or just get the access token for the user. And I've been struggling with it. I mean, I couldn't really find.
And you're looking for the workflow, right?
I mean, yeah. How do you set that token? That's the main question.
I think what it does is think of login as a remote method, right? And it's supposed to set the token for you and return it, I think. So if you call login, you get back, I think, an access token object, where the ID of the access token object is actually the access token itself. Something like that. So,
well, whenever you do
sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you try again?
Yeah, whenever you're doing the login, I think you get an ID for a session, an ID for a user. I don't think you really get the.
I'll go through the docs together. We did this exercise using Perl once, and then I just switched to Angular, but you can find it. Login. If I can just find the site, the documentation site. You have it mapped. Authentication maybe. So blah blah blah. Yeah, okay, here login users. So when you use login, just assume it's a REST call and you're calling user/login and passing in a JSON body. Yeah, you do get back an access token. It says, and that access token, so this thing right here is an access token model almost itself. And then so user ID is linked into it. So whatever user you were trying to log in, and the ID itself, which is the ID of the model that is called access token happens to be the access token.
Okay, okay. So that's where you get the access token.
So literally this is the access token model object. And you see, it's easier to realize this if you go here to db.json and look at its body.
Cool.
See how the key is the same as the key value pairs?
Yeah, I know. I didn't really get the how to do the file db.json, but now I think it's really easy. That's a major improvement, I think, for people who are just starting now. It will give less and less headaches, hopefully. So
Yeah,
thanks for
because
that.
I'm not a big fan of inspecting Mongo, and once it's in memory, I can't see it. So with file, it's just easier. Okay, so what else? So you asked about OAuth. I haven't used OAuth, so we can save it for another time. If I end up learning it or you end up learning it, we can talk about it. But I do know they have OAuth examples, and this I want to share with you. It's a bit of a GitHub hack, less to do with strong loop, but why not just say it out loud? People who may be coming from enterprise and may not work with GitHub that much. Let's just go to strong loop. So first of all, things to know about strong loop. There's a strong loop account, right? And then there's a strong loop community account. So there's two places you can go looking for source code.
Okay,
That's
cool. I didn't know this second one.
Yeah. So sometimes it's helpful. Now in strong loop, if you're looking for example, just type an example in this filter, and now all of these are example, right? They have too many things to look for otherwise. But when you're on this search page, I don't know how to do it using search GitHub over there, but here the filter is just applied for me, whatever the syntax is. So there's the example lab, blah, blah, blah. You care about, I imagine, OAuth, right? So let's see if they have OAuth example. Yeah. Passport.
I think
Ooh,
I
that's kind of
think
sad.
it has
Okay,
to
now we go to
match
Google.
that, right?
Passport. Actually, B-Man, this guy, he, luckily enough, did an integration with Passport.
For
So
for this same module.
for his admin module, yeah. So one of the cool things we may be able to do is let's just go to his source code uh, here, and just like we found this commit, let's see what he did with Passport or OAuth. Let's start with something generic like OAuth and code. Okay, so he's got Google OAuth, so I'm guessing he may be using it. That sounds. Let's just use the word passport to see if that gets us further in code. Yeah, so there's a boot script called passport.js, and you can just go look at it. Kind of lengthy, so I'm not going to try to read through it, but it seems like they have some concept of passport, and that we just either we read the docs or we read the docs while running things on this sample project, which is supposed to just work. We would probably get really far really fast.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Like,
so people, if just
yeah,
put search for the loopback angular admin from Beeman, which
yep.
is a really complete repository, and start from there.
Yeah, so his name is Bram, I think, or Bram, I don't know. But thank this guy. I think he's from Netherlands, and thanks to him, I can speed up my loopback development. So thank you. All right, if that's it, we can close this out.
Okay, thanks a lot for the information. I'll just stop the video now.
Yeah, just put it on Gitter or wherever other loopback people